My wife shared this story with me, and after reading it, I knew I had to share it here. I'm not the author, or know the author, but the story is written in first person. Due to the well of my friend's definition not an axe murderer date recommendations drying up, I have turned to that most sacred of modern relationship institutions, online dating. As a very busy person trying to get it in with other very busy people, I prize honesty and directness above all else when it comes to profile creation. I include full body shots in my photos, try to minimize the use of my space angles in selfies, and write at the very top of the summary caption profile that I'm fat, not curvy, not thick, not lots to love, I'm effing fat. I'm not ashamed of it, but I also know that weight is a deal breaker for lots of people. I don't want to waste anyone's time. About a year ago I met Evan via Tinder. We exchanged friendly messages for a few hours one night and agreed to meet up for drinks the following evening. I waited for a full hour past the designated time, and just as I was getting up to leave, the texts started rolling in. I can see you sweating from here. How long does it take you to roll out of bed every morning? Is there an earthquake, or are you just getting up for more pretzels? Really idiotic juvenile crap. 4 separate numbers, commenting on things like my clothes, which clued me in that the senders were nearby. This went on for 15 minutes before I finally saw Evan trying to hide in at a corner table and giggling with a group of buddies. I made eye contact, saw that he saw me, and then walked out. The texts kept up until I blocked the numbers a few hours later. I ran into Evan about 3 weeks later. We got on the same elevator, and he tried really hard at being super interested in the emergency phone instructions. I just confronted him, and he admitted it was just some game that him and his friends play. He knew I was fat before agreeing to meet up. They all did, because that's what they do. Match up with fat women, then either ghost them or troll them at the meetup. It was also kinda obvious he'd never seen any consequences from this bullcrap, as he was sweating pretty hard and looked more humiliated than I felt. I just said whatever and walked out, expecting to never see him again. About a month ago, some local foodie wrote a great review of the restaurant I own, and we've been slammed ever since. In the past, I stayed mostly in the kitchen, but I've been doing more and more front of house stuff lately, and Valentine's Day I was working a bit of a split between the two. I saw Evan just as he was pushing in his date's chair. My name isn't on the restaurant, and he didn't see me. I checked the section up at the hostess stand and saw that one of my favorite old timers, Nan, was going to be his waitress. I went to the bar till, took out $400, put it in her hands, and said, "This is going to be your only table for the rest of the night. You are going to make this the worst date he has ever been on." She spilled every single thing she brought out to the table, all over him. I was waiting for him to blow up on Nan, but he bottled it up, obviously trying to make a good impression on his date. She seemed like a perfectly lovely lady. I told Nan to make sure everything was good for her and terrible for Evan. She poured ice water on his DCK. She smacked the back of his head with the edge of a tray. Spilled soup on his shirt. Dropped every fork he asked for. I personally oversalted his food. Used the crap liquor for his drinks. Used flour instead of sugar on his dessert. To be honest, I don't know why he didn't just walk out. He must have really wanted to F this woman. Finally, he cracked. Demanded Nan find the manager and bring her out. I was only too happy to emerge from the kitchen with my chef's coat and say what I'm not ashamed to admit, I'd been planning out all night. I would have said hi earlier, but I didn't want the earthquake to disturb your dinner. I will savor the look on Evan's face for the rest of my life. He was a little too flummoxed to explain, so I pulled a chair up to the table and introduced myself to his date, Amanda. Told her how I met Evan. Showed her some fun old messages. Then I gave her a voucher for a free meal on her next visit, and told Evan to get the F out and never come back. He deleted his Tinder profile. So backstory, around the 2013 time frame was stationed at a recently shut down US Army garrison in South Korea. I was attached to a unit known as United Nations Command Honor Guard, UNCHG. This was a multinational honor guard with representative military branches from a few different countries all living together. We did ceremonies for all bigwigs that came to the country, as well as armed security for very sensitive buildings on the installation. Those of us in the US Army along with our South Korea counterparts were solely responsible for the guard work. I will refrain from using certain buildings by name, as they were highly sensitive buildings requiring a lot of security. They are more like underground bunkers for doomsday situations, with windows and doors painted on to fool any satellites. This is where my story begins. I had broken my hand and arm shortly after arriving in Korea through faults of my own. I was in a hard cast and was deemed unable to perform armed guard or ceremonies until I healed. So I primarily ran radio checks and did patrolling rounds to catch anyone sleeping on duty. On this particular day I was supposed to be off duty, but I was awoken by the sergeant of the guard who was also my squad leader. We will call him Sergeant K. He had an M9 with 2 mags and a pistol belt in hand. Before I can muster the words to explain him off, I'm informed that there is someone special in town and we must up the guards count. I try to explain there is no way in hell I can safely pull armed guard duty with a broken shooting hand and arm. At this point I was technically considered unqualified for the M9, since I hadn't been to the shooting range for it in months. He tells me just take it and go by the book. Roger effing that sunt. I was put into a building that has a foot thick vault door made of steel that leads to a protected guard booth. There is another door of equal size that leads to stairs that go to an underground tunnel that leads to a network of conference rooms as well as a large command hub. I've been on duty for around 2 hours at this station reading over the standard operating procedure (SOP) for this particular hub. I notice the book has a typo that clearly states only visitors that possess X color badge with X level security clearance are permitted access to this facility, when in reality, it should have stated only X at minimum level security clearance may access and all colors indicating higher security clearance are allowed access as well. Initiate compliance. In walks this British Army general in plain clothes. I ask for military ID to confirm who he is. He responds in good fashion, I shall certainly not have to show you who I am. I calmly stare that this is the rule, and as I'm not accustomed to him, I can't take his word. He finally shows me his access badge, which unfortunately for him is the highest level he's able to get. I show him the book and clearly point he can't access this facility unless he only has X clearance and no higher. The look on his face was almost too much to keep from laughing and breaking composure. He turns brightly red and walks out. I'm sure thinking him dim-witted. 10 minutes later I have a royalty pissed off Sergeant First Class E7 pounding his fist on my ballistic glass window. He is screaming open the goddamn door specialist before I skull drag you through this window. Now I've met this man before and he's typically a nice guy and helpful, but has just found out I refuse the British Army envoy access to the command meeting. This particular sergeant is the paper jockey for the 4-star general of the entire Korean Peninsula and Asian theater. He has been sent by the general's orders to adjust me. I ask to see this sergeant's security access before I open the door to get skull dragged. Unfortunately for him, book says he needs X and he has higher than X, so I refused. About 20 minutes later I have the entirety of my command staff in the room with me screaming and hollering, threatening to chapter me out for disobedience. I calmly ask to explain my actions and the circumstances. The sergeant from earlier arrives just in time for the explanation. He is still beet red and fuming to high hell. I open the book and point at it and tell them I went by the book as ordered to by Sergeant K, and the book states that only X was allowed, and as stupid and ridiculous as it sounded, the book says anyone with a higher clearance was no authorized. The looks around this tiny room are of hysteria and defeat. The first one to laugh is this pissed off sergeant from earlier who took the book and trashed it in the burn box and walked out. My co-and place spent that night typing a new SOP for all GUTS stations, and Sergeant K was confined to pulling 24-hour guard shifts every other day for the week as punishment for making an unqualified and physically incapable shooter pull an armed guard shift, and I was exempted from guard duty until the cast came off. So this chick, who I will call Psycho from now on, was friends with my boyfriend, and she flipped out one day after he crashed at her and her boyfriend's house. He had to work early and his boss, who is my best friend's husband, called me freaking out because my boyfriend is never late and he was almost 2 hours late at that point. So because Psycho wasn't responding to boss man, he had me try to message her, which I did. She flipped out. Said she wasn't my boyfriend's caretaker and that she shouldn't be responsible for waking him up when his phone died while her and her boyfriend were using his hotspot after he crashed on her couch. She then went on a rampage saying I was a gold digger. I always have told him no when he wanted to buy me something and proceeded to threaten me in a Facebook post. When my best friend defended me, Psycho threatened to go to her house and beat the living crap out of her. Oh, and that was recorded voice message. After both my best friend and I blocked Psycho, she used her boyfriend's Facebook to threaten us and talk more crap. So we kept screenshots and blocked him too. Fun doesn't stop there. She then had her mutual friends with my boyfriend message us up and down saying how we were out of line and how Psycho was right to say everything she did. More screenshots ensued. Now, in all this time, Psycho's boss was at boss man's work. Now boss man was getting angry because of the threats to his wife, and he happens to know Psycho's boss very well. In fact, Psycho's boss is married to boss man's uncle. So he let her know what was going on and boy was she pissed. Did I mention Psycho worked as a psychiatric nurse? So because of all the drama and threats, Psycho's boss decided to give the whole staff a random drug test at her next shift. Guess who was the only one to pop for pot, benzos, and MDMA? If you guessed Psycho, yeah, I'll be right. So now Psycho has lost her job. Her boyfriend left her because she can no longer support him and he refuses to work. She can't get another job in her field and thinks all other jobs are beneath her. And all this started because I asked her to wake up my boyfriend so he could go to work. July of 2002, when I was 16, our neighbor who was a brat with a capital C decided she wanted to have satellite TV installed. The house she lived in had a very small yard in back, smaller in front, and the fence that my mother had installed a couple of years ago was only about 5 yards from her side door. The only place the satellite could be installed was on the back of the house, but there was no way the vehicles could make it to her backyard. So, in her infinite wisdom, Brat decided to have them tear down our fence and drive over our property to get to her backyard. This starts a huge fight between her and my mother. Brat tries to claim that mom built the fence too close to her house anyway and mom produced the land description to prove the fence was in the right spot. Turns out they were both wrong. We knew the woman had built her house too close to the property line, but it seems it was closer than we thought. She was only feet from the line. That fence should have been almost touching the side of her house. Her uncle was the deputy mayor of our small, 2000 pop town and she tried to get him involved. Nothing came of it, so we thought it was over. Late September, early October that same year, while I was in school, mom was taking a shower when our 2 dogs alerted her to someone at our door. She put on a bathrobe and went to see the police chief and about a dozen officers on our lawn, claiming they had been tipped off to a meth lab on the property and demanded to be allowed to search. Mom realized that Brad had to have been the one to call them, as the chief of police was known to be a personal friend to her family. Mom demanded a search warrant and they didn't have one, which triggered several hours of them refusing to leave until they searched the property. This all started around 9 or 10 in the morning. Nearing 3 PM, mom tells them she needs to pick me up from school and take me to her mother's house because I couldn't drive yet. They refuse to move their vehicles to let her leave and say it's fine. They'll send a squad car to pick me up, which would have just humiliated me. Mom calls her lawyer who informs her that if they don't produce a warrant, to tell them to leave. So, the chief tells her if he goes for a warrant, he'll tell whoever issues them that he can smell meth on the property and will be given a warrant for anything he asks for. He will then return, kick our door out of the frame, and if our dogs even look at him for that, he'll shoot both of them in the head and kill them both. Yes, he actually said that to my mother. Mom called grandma to pick me up from school nearly an hour after it let out and let the police search the house. They find my mom's gun safe. This safe was one of those made of steel with a circular lock, kind of like on a soda machine, and had the key sitting on top of it. Before anyone says how unsafe it is, it was just my mom and stepdad in the house most of the time. I was an only child and lived with my grandparents and only visited on weekends, and mom kept the door to her room locked with a key. There was no way anyone under 18 was getting near her guns. The cops proceed to take a crowbar and pry the safe open, even though the key is right there, and it's clearly the key to the safe. They then take the guns outside and divide them up. They even take my mom's handgun, which she had a concealed carry permit for. This continued for hours, until mom relented and opened my stepdad's shop building. He was using it to house his motorcycle, while he slowly restored it from a wreck about 15 years before. They barely got over the threshold of the door before screaming meth lab and pointed at the cleaning agents and bottles that were all scooted together. Nothing else. No other signs of meth other than some cleaning agents and empty mason jars sitting near one another. They brought out heavy spot lamps and more cops. By 1 in the morning my mother had been sitting outside in the cool, fall weather in nothing but a bathrobe this entire time. They claimed to have found a marijuana plant behind our 6-foot tall privacy fence that kept people from seeing us in our hot tub. When I found out about this, I was upset. I was 16 and went to school in a small town. Everyone would know about it. The next day, Saturday, I was fiddling around on the internet when a friend messaged me to ask what had happened and why was my mother in jail. My mother was not in jail. Friend, my mom said it's on the news right now. Mom and stepdad, last name, are sitting in jail this weekend without bond for running the largest drug den in your town's history. When mom called the news to ask them why they'd ran that story without checking, they apologized and said they'd been contacted by town police and were told to run the story. The next night they issued a public apology for it. I refused to go to school that Monday. It's very important to note that I had not been in school since Friday. On Tuesday when my grandpa dropped me off, the drug sniffing dog was at the school. However, as it was close to drug-free week, I thought nothing of it. My business teacher told me she'd seen the article in the local paper, but that it looked like it had been staged, and if I caught any crap for it, to let her know. I went to my locker as the officer walked out of the same hallway, but since that was the hall the principal's office was on, didn't think anything of it. I noticed a locker standing completely open, and when I got to it, I realized it was my locker. I blew up on the principal. I understand now that it's not my property and the school can authorize it being searched, but it was just bullcrap. Why was I being searched? Principal, no, you weren't searched. You must have left your locker open last night. Me, friend 1, and friend 2 have their lockers next to mine, and they have basketball practice until 4. They shut my locker if I leave it open. I haven't been here since Friday. Are you telling me that everyone in this school left a locker standing open for all of Monday? I called my mom and was pulled out of school for Tuesday as well. Ultimately, all the charges were thrown out because of that marijuana plant. The chief of police put in his official report that it had been 8 feet tall, and when questioned about it, when they tried to press drug charges on mom he clearly said yes, Your Honor, it was 8 feet tall. The judge asked him when he found it, and he said about 1 in the morning. The judge then said if there really had been a marijuana plant that was 8 feet tall behind a 6-foot tall fence, he would not have needed to demand permission to search the property. The charges were thrown out. And that's where it stood for 10 years. Mom waited and played the long game because she wanted to make fully sure the statute of limitations ran out. She didn't want to give him any legal reason to retaliate against her. She waited and waited. Then, on the first town council meeting after the statute ran out, she made contact with one of the council members. In a small town, you don't F with the council members. Everyone knows them, and everyone listens to them. Or, they do here at least. This was the head of the council too, and at the time his grandson was my coworker, so he knew of me, and he liked me well enough, since I worked for the largest business in our area. He listened to mom's story and told her that the last head heard there was nothing in the evidence locker at the station at the moment, meaning none of the guns they had confiscated had been entered. When she told him most of them belonged to me and were basically family heirlooms, they were. He nodded and asked her that if he could produce those guns, could she prove they belonged to us? Mom said she had a notebook of descriptions of the guns, their serial numbers on the hunting rifles that had scopes, and that 2 of them had distinguishing marks that were hidden from sight, but she could find them and show them off. Because my mom loves having a paper trail on everything. He told her she would get them back that Monday. We found out that he went to the station and told the same police chief that because they had never successfully charged us with any crime and that now the statute of limitations had run out, all the confiscated property had to be turned back over to us. But there was a rumor that the guns weren't in evidence. He would be in on Monday to have it checked. The police chief went pale, and on Monday, they were all in the evidence locker. However, one of them was missing a scope. It came out somehow that the chief of police had never intended to enter them into evidence and had sold them to his friends. Had been thinking he got away with it for a decade until mom turned back up with proof that they belonged to her and legally had to now be returned. He had to go and buy back every one of them, sometimes paying more than twice what had been paid, because some of these friends had not been speaking to him for some time, and one of them had taken the scope off a while back. He was immediately fired and arrested for it. We got our guns back. Thank you for watching. Slap that like button and comment your opinion on these stories below. I'm waiting. Write that comment. Seriously. Have you written it yet? If you don't comment, you make a bunny cry somewhere. You're not that kind of person, I know. Anyways, peace out, and catch you tomorrow.